is our first experiment with using this platform to show live coding. Today we've got MC Reed from Contrast Security, who is going to show us their tools that integrate with the DevOps process. And they're pretty cool from a developer's point of view. You don't need to be a security expert by any means, but they will make you feel really confident. They won't get in the way. And MC, with that, how about if I just go ahead and let you start talking? I'll tee you up with one question. Um, the what's your favorite thing about contrast security? Should I start you there? How do you, no, here's a better one. How do you wake up one morning knowing that you need contrast security?
Yeah. So for everyone on the line, we did not prep with that question. That came fresh to me just now, so I'm tap dancing on my feet. But the first thing that came to my mind, so I worked for about 10 years ago. I started in 2000. Well, I worked for Clockwork 10 years ago, and then Coverity. Those were static analysis vendors. You may not recognize those names because they've since been purchased. Coverity was the leader in the space at the time, and they were purchased by Synopsys, so they are now Synopsys now. And so I knew this space, and in my mid to late 20s, I was naive enough to think that a decade hence, that the problem would mostly be solved by now. But the business challenges have changed so much, and the nature of software. Everyone who's old enough to remember, software in 2003, the world is now radically different. SaaS wasn't a thing. We were just starting to think about the fact that you could have an application on the web, and that was this newfangled thing. That's how old I am. So when I think about the value that Contrast offers, I think about the process that I went through with the recruiter about a year ago, because they called me up, and this area, it's so new that it wasn't really on my radar. And I literally said to her, hasn't this problem already been solved? And I realized many times over the past year how naive of a comment that was, because as software continues to change, the challenges and technical and business challenges continue to change. And so the response that software and innovation need to have, they all continue to change. I tell my customers all the time, because we're competing obviously against static analysis and dynamic analysis, either directly in terms of technology or in terms of mind share and obviously dollars. I'm a sales engineer, so I think about technology and money, obviously. And the value that we bring to the table is static analysis, dynamic analysis, both undeniably provide value, but they both also have inherent limitations that are inherent to the technology. So the world ate up static analysis in 2006, 2007, 2008. I was a part of that wave as a sales engineer, bringing that to the masses. And it was undeniably better than the value that the world had 5 years before. No one had been able to even have the hint of a promise of 100% code coverage. And people always worried with my dynamic analysis, I'm going to test, but did I miss something? Now, even static analysis doesn't provide 100% code coverage. A lot of people still think that, so maybe I can offer an insider's perspective and pull back that kimono. But static analysis is going to have an inherent level, a strong one, if you've seen it, of false positives and false negatives. The false negatives, the stuff that you don't know that's there, that keeps you up at night, that you can't quantify. You know that you've tested what you've tested, but you don't know what you've missed. And dynamic analysis, to a large degree, and because it's been around longer, I think that we probably understand that to a greater degree, what it's capable of doing, where its weak spots are. It's still going to, and I think of dynamic analysis as being outside of the party, standing in the rain. It sees people go in, sees people come out, but it doesn't really know what's going on inside of the house. It has to make guesses. And we've gotten really good through manual testing, manual heuristics, and constant tuning of making that better and better. But it's still a lot of guesswork, and it's still using a lot of incomplete context. And that's just a conversational way of laying out the shortcomings of dynamic analysis and static analysis. Static analysis is obviously never going to have the context that happens at runtime. It's also extremely computationally expensive. And then that leads to a couple of things. One, the static analysis vendors, I tell this story, and there's actually a blog post coming out, I think later this week that I wrote, which I'm rather proud of, about what was going on in 2008, back when static analysis was focused on was focused on code quality and not security, because businesses were just starting to make the mistakes that caused them to realize that they needed to tighten and secure their software. And the vendors quickly realized that in order to do a complete analysis, it would literally take weeks. Imagine not just a 10x build time, but a 30x build time to do a complete path analysis to understand everywhere that code can go, everywhere that code can come from, to make sure that you don't miss anything, so that you either give false positives or that you miss a potential input or miss testing a potential input and not report something that needs to be reported. They all quickly took shortcuts to make sure that they could keep their build times at about 2x. That's about what the market could stomach at the time. And even with 2x, even with the false positives and the false negatives, the level of automation and insight was so much better than 5 years prior that everyone ate it up. And it was providing value. The problem is the world needs more. That's no longer good enough. We're keenly aware of how much time and money we've spent into tuning both dynamic analysis and static analysis. And some companies, unfortunately, are aware of the things that were still missed. And they're trying to figure out how to visualize that. So that's probably what time is it? That's a 7-minute version, Matt, of the value. That's the reason I came to Contrast.
Yeah.
So it was an easy question to answer. Unfortunately, I'm a wordy guy, but I think it's a valuable conversation because it helps set the context for why the heck do I need to look at a new piece of technology?
Yeah.
It's the same reason that I decided to get back into this game.
Yeah, I mean,
There's
you guys
more
are making
value to
things
be
better,
provided.
so that's why I'm excited to have you here.
Yeah.
So, what are we looking at here now? You want to just take it over and go into the demo?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and dive right in. And thank you everyone for sitting through that. Like I said, I think it's valuable, but I know that we came to see the good stuff. So what we're looking at on my screen is a dashboard for a specific application. We call it the team server, but this is our the server side of our product, where we're able to visualize the information that we're providing, the value that we're providing. Most developers are not going to spend their time here, but I needed to start our conversation here to add context to the direct developer experience. So I clicked on the frog in my throat, the Contrast logo up here to come back to the main screen. This is going to be the high-level dashboard across all of the different applications and all of the different organizations that are in your company. So it may be that certain people see certain things. I may only be concerned about one application or a couple of its tiers or a microservice, but a large organization is also going to need to have a bird's eye view of what's going on in terms of trends over the past couple of days, the vulnerabilities themselves, as well as something we won't spend a whole lot of time on, but it is there and it's very powerful. What's going on in production? How are the ops guys and gals responding to live attacks against your production infrastructure? And can we use the power of the platform to marry the two into a true DevSecOps implementation? A lot of people are talking about DevSecOps. We've gotten very good at DevOps itself. We've gotten very good at having high velocity. We know that we want to have security in our process, but especially as developers, we can't slow down the rate at which we churn out things. We're under too much pressure. We have too much functionality that we need to deliver. So we know that DevSecOps is there. We're trying to figure out the right way to get there. And I think that Contrast offers an innovative approach to that. So I've come to a particular application. This happens to be a .NET framework application. This is a demo that I built that's centered around using Microsoft Azure, Azure DevOps, as well as Microsoft technologies. We are not a Microsoft-centric or a Microsoft-focused application. I just happened to have built this demo for a specific purpose, and I thought that it was good to show. Everything that I show here is going to be perfectly applicable to all of the other languages that we support. I am going to click on Add Agent real quick and show you what those languages are right now. Obviously, the two biggest languages that we're going to support are going to be Java and .NET X, .NET asterisk, because that's where most of the business logic is. More and more we're seeing that there is need for things like Python, Ruby, either because the business logic is there, but not so much. Mostly it's because they want to have a unified strategy across as many languages as possible. IaaS is really hard to do, but it's also extremely valuable in terms of what it shows. We're going to be coming out with Go imminently. I'm still waiting for a release date, but that's a major priority, as well as some other futures, Azure functions. We have complete support for cloud technologies, container technologies. We're going to be coming out with specific support for serverless, and that's probably going to start with AWS and move on to Azure as well. But back to the actual application, and I'll get to the developer experience real soon. What we're looking at here is, starting on the left, the developer experience. What's going on in development, what's going on in QA, whatever form that takes, whether it's my CI/CD pipeline. We do have customers that are still working in a bit of a waterfall model. We lend ourselves very well to an agile world, but you don't need to be an agile shop in order to get benefit from us. And then, of course, production. And what you're going to find is we're going to offer specific things to all of these stakeholders, but we're also going to leverage the information from all of the other stakeholders to make our individual job better, faster, easier. Now, one more page before, I'm going to spend some time here, but one more page before I go over to Visual Studio, which is the IDE that I'm going to pick on today. I clicked on vulnerabilities to come to the vulnerabilities tab. This is really important, obviously, because it's the core part of the value that we provide, but it's not just about the vulnerabilities themselves. When I talk to customers, I talk about the overall attack surface, and that's going to be mitigated or exacerbated by a number of things, including the severity of the vulnerability itself, whether or not it came from your code or from a third-party library, whether that third-party library has known vulnerabilities or not, how long you've been exposed to this vulnerability, and can we take DevOps, inject DevSecOps or security into it, and still have those tight turnaround times? Because DevOps is all about saying we need to get out fast iterations. And I get the impression from a lot of my customers that there's some inherent headbutting and politics between development and security. That's because development has got to get things out the door, and whenever security comes along, it means they've got to slow down. And there's some headbutting about whether or not to address it now or address it later. And the question is, can we address it now and do it quickly, get it out of the way, and keep going? Or can AppSec give me some air cover in the meantime, so that I don't have to address that right now? I don't have to miss my schedules, and I can schedule the security fix in when I'm ready. Now, on the screen, webgoat.net, by the way, some of you may or may not know what it is. Our co-founder is also the co-founder of an organization called OWASP, which is kind of the authority in the industry for application security and understanding what's secure, what isn't, and staying ahead of that curve. He also helped to write the Java version of this application. I'm not 100% sure about the .NET version, but they do the same thing. It's basically a training manual for how to reproduce and understand the nature of and ultimately resolve security vulnerabilities. So it's a training manual. And so what we see here are going to be obviously a lot of reds because they were intentionally put into the application so that we could display them. I'm going to pick on one. I believe this is the one that I want to do, and it is. So on this page, for any stakeholder, the person that's looking at this page, we're going to show this in a moment in Visual Studio where the developer is doing their work. We're going to show it in Azure with the CI/CD pipeline. The idea is we want to take the expertise of the AppSec team and we want to make it so it's directly consumable by someone else, especially the developers, at the point where the code ideally is, the vulnerability is put into the code. So we see here, first of all, in the Overview tab, what happened. We had this web request coming into our application. Someone literally typed this string into a field in the application. It was brought in, but we are, and I think maybe I got a little bit ahead of myself, we are what's called IAST. That's the acronym that Gartner has given us. How that differs from static analysis, which is a compiler-based technology, and dynamic analysis, which is this external agent that's throwing web traffic at the application and observing the response. We're going to be an agent that sits inside of the runtime itself. So we're not slicing and dicing bytecode. There are publicly available APIs for doing this. If you're familiar with any of the APMs of the world, we are precisely the same thing, doing something a little different. Instead of looking at performance monitoring like AppD or New Relic, we're looking for bad behavior that leads to security vulnerabilities. That's it.
So is this
Because we're
parameter?
inside,
I'm sorry. Is this
yeah,
parameter you're highlighting here? Is that something that someone actually did try to inject? Did that actually happen?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
okay.
So, and as a matter of fact, this wasn't even an attack attempt. That's another major difference between
Okay.
us and dynamic analysis. Someone used this app. We would have spotted it if they had actually tried to attack the application, but here they just used the web page normally. We watched the information come in. We watched how it moved around the application, and ultimately we saw that it was concatenated. It was inserted into this SQL query without any sort of sanitization. And we knew that if someone had purposely tried to form a purpose-formed SQL query or partial SQL query, they could have changed the intended structure of the total SQL query. And I'm actually going to see us attack. I'm going to show you us attacking the application in a little while. And so this is really valuable because right now, especially with dynamic analysis, we're dependent on what we can imagine about how the application can be attacked. With IAST, you don't have to imagine anymore. That's our job now. And so as soon as you start testing your application, we're going to start to point out the vulnerabilities to you, whether you attacked it or not. You just need to use it. And that's another major role. So we showed a high level of what happened. We also tell, and I know this is a developer forum, but the reality is that one of the reasons that we're in business is that there's still this concentration of security expertise on the AppSec team. Developers may not necessarily have that expertise. Their expertise is something else, and that's pumping out high quality, reliable code quickly, right? So how do we get the AppSec team's expertise over to the developers? We're telling the consumer, here's what the risk is. For a SQL injection, that's not really hard to understand, but there are a lot of vulnerability types out there as you get into cross-site scripting and various types of forging and unserialized execution. Those are things that we don't necessarily know that we're injecting into the code, and so this tool is going to help us visualize those things. Here's what happened. Here's why you should care about it. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, just apologies to the audience. I don't know how to move that little bar that's covering the what's the risk explanation. It's a Teams thing. I haven't figured it
Not
out yet.
covering it, but let me. Oh, is there a bar that's blocking everyone?
Yeah, it's on my screen. So, which is being
Okay, then
shared
tell you what, I'm
with
going
everyone
to
watching. Sorry about
make
that.
this a little smaller,
Oh, good job. Yeah, there you
and
go.
let's see if we can get away from that bar.
Thank you, MC. Nice teamwork here.
Is that good?
Scroll down. Yeah, do it again. Just move your screen up a little more.
No,
Sorry.
I'm going to need to move the
Yeah,
browser up a little more.
there. That's
How
good.
about
Now,
that?
perfect.
Okay. So here's what happened. Here's why it's important. Here is what I like to call the guided tour through your code of how this data needed to move around, where it went in order for this exploit to be successful. And ultimately, here's a strong suggestion of the coding paradigm that you can follow so that this is not an issue anymore. Now, I start in the web environment because it's a complex environment that shows the data in a very powerful way. I'm going to go ahead and move over down here to Visual Studio. And based on what Matt just told me, I'm going to move this up here and do the same thing.
Perfect.
This is Visual Studio 19. Just matching up the window sizes. And this is webgoat.net. And we're seeing here the plugin at the bottom that has the same vulnerabilities. They're pulling from the same place. As a matter of fact, which vulnerability did I take a look at? I believe it was this one. And it was. So we see the same data here. But now we've shifted left. So we come back to the overview. Instead of needing to look at our code right here, we can now put this in the hands of the developers. And what we're saying is we can help put this in the hands of the developers without, or at least the value that we add in whatever slowdown is going to happen is worth more than the amount of slowdown itself. I think there's always a trade-off, and let's be honest about that. But the idea is I'm going to run some unit tests. This is essentially a dynamic analysis technology. It's inside the application, but we're going to need the application to run. And let me address that 100% in a little while. But the idea is that after we've done our manual or our unit testing, here on the desktop, we're able to know what vulnerabilities we're about to inject into the code base. And it's the same information. Here's what happened. Here's why it's a risk. Here's our guided walkthrough of the code. My arrows will switch side. And here's how I can fix this. But now this is in the code that I'm taking a look at. We have a couple of ways of integrating the agent into the developer desktop. There's going to be an agent. There's going to be a separate agent for each language. So there's going to be a jar on the Java side. There's going to be some sort of DLL on the .NET side. On this application, it happens to be running in two ways. There happens to be an agent that is hooked directly into IIS, because at the time that I built the demo, I wasn't sure how we would use it in the future. This particular agent happens to be hooked directly into IIS Express. So I'm actually going to go ahead and fire that up for something that I want to show in a little while.
A quick question from the audience here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is the plugin available on Visual Studio 2017 and VS Code, or only on Visual Studio 2019?
Nope, it's available on all three. As a matter of fact, we just upgraded to 2019 about 6 months ago, and we have a Visual Studio. As a matter of fact, it's already waiting for you here. Visual Studio Code plugin that I believe is either in beta or has been released. This happens to be a pre-release version that I'm showing here. So I personally don't have as much experience with Visual Studio Code. And as I go and I talk to customers, I haven't heard them talking about it yet. But it's this sleeping giant because I know that it's extremely popular. So I'm waiting for people to ask me about it.
We'll fix that for you. We'll fix that for you.
Okay. All that to say, I wasn't quite sure how to form the presentation here, but we do have this plugin. We see it right here, and we do have access to the same vulnerabilities that we had in the other. So that's the long version of yes.
Cool. Thank you.
So this demo happens to be one such that I envisioned that the developer would do their testing, they would fix their code, and they would ultimately check into an Azure pipeline, or Azure DevOps pipeline, which is all live here. And I'll kind of illustrate that in a moment. But I did want to give you an initial taste of the application. This happens to be WebGoat, or at least the .NET version of it. And I'm actually going to show this vulnerability twice. I'm going to go over to the SQL injection section, and I'm going to show, just by searching for all names that have the letter T in it, how this sucker is supposed to work. And I believe this is a MySQL database on the back end. That matters because if you're going to hack something in a particular way, sometimes you need to know the character for comments. If we were to pass in this string, essentially show me all names that have the letter T in it, or all lines where 1 equals 1. And of course, that's going to show me all lines. That is your classic SQL injection. This was launched in development mode because it's on the developer desktop. If I come back here, literally these vulnerabilities in my demo were generated from my exercising of IIS Express on this machine. We could even go over to the server section. This is outside of maybe the developer purview. But I do want to illustrate the fact that it's all live. If I were to sort by, I typically do last seen, we're going to see that my desktop is at or near the top. And it is that guy right there. So they're both live, but it's this one that's actually generating the vulnerabilities. The whole point is that regardless of where your application is run, whether it's in your CI/CD pipeline, whether it's on your scores or hundreds or thousands of instances of developer desktops, depending on the size of your organization, or whether you've got some complex, globally scalable cloud deployment across multiple geos, ideally, we want to be in every running instance of the application so that if bad behavior occurs, we can spot it. A vulnerability just occurred. If I deleted it correctly before we got together today, I should be able to go over to my messaging application, and yes. So I'm skipping ahead a little bit. We don't want you as a consumer to need to come to our web UI. We don't want any of your stakeholders to need to do that. We want to deliver our value where you already are, where you're already doing work, whether that's the IDE, whether that's some sort of notification mechanism such as Microsoft Teams. It's not the only one that we support. Whether it is embedding information as an audit trail directly into your CI/CD pipeline. We want to deliver the information where you already are. So here we see 224. I'm in Atlanta, so Eastern time zone. We can click on hyperlinks and navigate back to the team server if we want. But here's a quick notification to everyone of what happened, what the recommendation is. We actually have access to all of that information here. So coming back, I ran that in development mode. Of course, I could go through the motions of, let me go over to my Solution Explorer. I'm gonna, actually I already had this open. I'm gonna make some kind of white spacing changes. I'm gonna save. I no longer need this, I'll go ahead and kill it. And I'm just gonna go ahead and go over to Team Explorer and check this in. So changes, what do we have? Say, test check, and I'm always the most nervous. I type great. I'm always the most nervous when typing in front of people. I'm not sure if you all like that, but I'm going to go ahead and commit that, and I'm going to click on sync to ship this off to Azure DevOps. So this is going to, I've got continuous builds set up inside of Azure DevOps that we'll see in a moment. And so this is kicking off a build as well as a release pipeline right now, and we'll show you the timestamps on that. But the idea is that now that I've received my notifications, now that I've had access to my vulnerabilities, one thing that I didn't mention, we can scope these vulnerabilities according to the needs of the person who's using Visual Studio. So right now it's set to global. Show me all of the vulnerabilities that are currently, and their current statuses for the application. But I may just want to see my vulnerabilities. And there are a couple of ways to do that. The easiest way is, rather than not scoping by server, please take my word for it, that happens to be our server. I'm running on this machine, which I've named NIS Express. I could scope this down to just the things that have been reported from my server that are still open. If you do that, essentially, you're going to have a running tally of the stuff that you've created. You can go ahead and fix it before you check in your code, and you're done. And so if you hear terms like shifting left, that's how you do it. We're going to have complete integration between, let me click on a particular vulnerability, between the statuses that are in the team server, the statuses that are here, and the statuses that are in your bug tracking tool. And that's, again, because we don't want to give you more bookkeeping to do or another interface to go to as you try to scale up and scale your operations. So if you set up the integration, it's very easy to do. You're going to make it so you can manage these vulnerabilities from here. And again, that's going to sync directly with not only the web interface that you saw before, but also, at least in this case, Azure boards, which I'm going to show in a moment. So as I change the notifications here, that's going to sync up. Likewise, I'm going to come back and show the vulnerability section here. If I happened to be doing my triaging here, we set up integration with Azure Boards, Jira, some of the others in one of two ways. You can either manually triage and then ship these things off to your bug tracking facility. So I'm clicking on the little paper plane, and we happen to have two in this environment. But let's assume we're only dealing with Azure Boards. That would then send it off, and I can change some of the metadata around this. This is because maybe we trust the data in Azure Boards. We want to keep it pure. We want to triage this information before we ship it off. What you're going to find, and people want that because they've been dealing with some of the limitations of static analysis and dynamic analysis for a long time. They need to be tuned. What you're going to find with us is that unless our agent, which is software, got something wrong, and we'll fix it in about 2 weeks, unless it got something wrong, you're going to find that literally north of 98% of the vulnerabilities that we report to you are things that need to be fixed. They'll be of varying importance to you, obviously. Not everything's going to be critical red, but they will be things that are accurate and need to be fixed. So once you get to that point, you can actually set up the integration so that as soon as the vulnerability is detected, we automatically file a case, a bug, whatever you want to call it, inside of Azure Boards. The presumption being maybe Azure Boards that's where you've built your automation and your process. So let's get this into the process as quickly as possible. That also means there's less legwork for you all to do. And it also means that when we talk about actual DevSecOps, this turnaround time between finding something, fixing it, testing it, and getting it back out to production, that's going to be as tight as possible.
Hey,
that was the promise of DevOps. Yeah.
Just help me reorient
Yeah.
myself again. In terms of like typical workflow, when would you be doing what you just did when you went into Visual Studio and sort of looked at the information there? Would you be doing that just as part of your typical workflow, or am I jumping ahead to where you're going to show us how you fit Azure Boards into it, or when?
Well, I was going to move into Azure Boards, in just a moment. There's not a whole lot of workflow there because that's really defined by the customer. But I'm an ex-developer myself. I imagine that I'm going to be coding. As a matter of fact, I was coding all morning, and I'm going to be going through iterations. I'm not going to be doing my security testing, I believe, until right before I check in.
Yeah.
So assuming that a sprint lasts a week, 2 weeks, that code's still going to be relatively fresh on my mind. The idea is going to be once I get the functionality in place, this is going to be one of my sanity checks before I check in, and I'm going to be able to. I did some manual testing, so I opened up webgoat.net and I ran it. You may have some automated tests that you run, and this list that we see here is going to be updated. And hopefully, ideally, we're going to be fixing these things before we check in. There's a saying that I've had for the past 20 years that I got from one of my mentors. It's obviously pay me now or pay me later. There's some time and some investment that it takes to fix these things now. It's only going to be more costly, more hurtful, or take more time later on. Bottom line.
Yeah, because you want to do it when you're in the flow, and that's when it's cheapest. Yeah.
You don't want someone else to have to fix your code. You don't want to have to come back and remember what you were doing because less than 2 weeks, you know what you were doing.
Yeah.
And now you can change it effectively.
Cool. That helps me get oriented. Thanks. Show us Azure Boards or wherever you're at.
And
sorry.
Absolutely. Now, no. Keep interjecting. We've got two minds working on making sure the flow is here, and I want to make sure I give the one that's appropriate for the audience.
Yeah.
So I've gone through multiple iterations of deleting all of my vulnerabilities, which means that which isn't something an organization would typically do, right? Which means that the next time that we detected vulnerabilities, we filed them as new. And so we've got a couple of copies of the vulnerabilities here. Again, that's not a normal workflow. That's what I do for my purposes. But the idea here is that you can tune and massage the information so it appears how you want it to appear. So that maybe it's auto-assigned to the person or to the group or with the state or even the application that you want it to be injected here with. But if we click on, actually we saw on the previous page 3 of these because I was specifically attacking the application with this beforehand. What we're seeing here, and remember the theme that I had, not make you need to go into contrast, but deliver our information where you're already doing business. It's the same information. Here's what happened. Here's what happened. Different vulnerability though. Here's why it's important. Here's how you fix it. Now, we're bounded by the graphical limitations of the medium that we're injecting this stuff into. But the idea is that sometimes there are operations people or there are build admins who don't want to need to go to another console. Or in larger organizations, they don't want to look at the 30 consoles that they have. They want to have custom roll-up reports. So they would pull our data out using our REST API. The idea is that we can deliver our value where you want it delivered. For some people, that's in the web UI. For some people, it's going to be elsewhere. But here we're going to see what happened, how we fix that information as we manage the severities and the states. Those are going to be synced back to the what we call the team server. So if my view of the world is right here, I can manage this 100% from right here. If I can manage it, if my view of the world is as a developer, I can manage it from right here. If contrast detects a vulnerability and I fix it and then I run the application again, contrast will detect that the vulnerability no longer exists and automatically close the vulnerability here, here, and here. to give you less work to need to do.
Nice.
So vulnerability is going to come into and out of existence, but you don't necessarily need to spend half your day doing bookkeeping. We can scale to that level. There was one thing that I wanted to touch on. That's part of a story, but I do want to complete this, and I want to show two things in particular: the libraries and the route coverage. So another common problem is, people move on from the organization, or you acquire an organization and an application, or for whatever reason, you don't necessarily know how to gauge whether you have 100% code coverage. That's what we called it 10 years ago. Now we call it route coverage because everything is going to be a connected application. This page, though it's a little static because there's not a whole lot of change in the code base, what it's showing me is, here are all of my routes into the application. The green ones are the total number of, all of them are the total number of routes that have been detected. The green ones are the total number of routes that were covered by your testing, whether it's QA or development. And the red ones are the ones that are currently vulnerable. Now, what we want is to see everything here green to the top. It means that we've tested everything, and we want to see that there's no red. That means that there are no vulnerabilities. These gaps are the gaps in your current coverage, whether you're talking about developer time unit testing or CI/CD. So if people need to know what they need to test, here's our guided walkthrough. These represent ones that have vulnerabilities. If I click on this, here are the web routes that represent that endpoint. If I'm coding a module, if I'm changing a module and I need to know what to test in order to know that my code is rock solid, this is your guided walkthrough. We could just filter it down to the classes that we've changed, and we'll give you the web routes. And if we want to make sure, again, there's always a little bit of angst with spending a bit more time to fix these things up front. But again, it's always, I guarantee you, 100% easier to do it there. And here's our map of how to do it. The other thing, and this is not a day one activity. Day one, we're going to worry about our code. And specifically, we're going to worry about the code that I just wrote. But more and more of your application is not going to be greenfield. It's going to be third-party libraries and open source code. And there's going to be a group in your organization that's going to worry about how much of a security threat those libraries are, especially since a lot of them are old. It's a little bit of an outdated analogy, but think about the vulnerabilities that have been exposed over the past 7 years, the Heartbleeds of the world, and everything that happened in OpenSSL, or if you have a certain type of HTTPS connection, you can read passwords out of the buffers. There's been a lot of them, and they're happening all the time. So we're going to give you a view of how your third party and open source is contributing to your overall attack surface. I'm going to quickly search on, this is going to be a Java library. It's going to be Spring, let's get the last name of it because I never need to know it. We should have another update coming in a moment. There we go, Spring Security. So common library. We're going to show you for all libraries, here's the libraries that you have. Here's what version of the library has been detected. Whether or not, of course, there are vulnerabilities associated with that library. And in this case, there happens to be a publicly identified CVE, and which applications that library is being used in, as well as how much of that library is being used. So for example, this first line, there's a publicly known CVE in this library. It's included in these applications, and none of the classes are being called. So why the heck is it in the application? Because someone needed it at some point, the code changed sufficiently such that it wasn't being used anymore, but this vulnerability is either waiting to be exacerbated again, or is there, and our current testing simply hasn't uncovered it. Let's get it out of there. If the library is old, then whatever problems it has, the bad guys know about, and that gives them a recipe book for how to try to attack your application, hoping they'll get lucky. And we want to mitigate that risk. So if I click on this,
you could drive yourself crazy trying to worry about all that. This is nice.
Well, some people buy separate tools, OSS tools, SCA tools, just to look at the stuff. Again, it's not what they buy first. They buy the vulnerability stuff first. But if they want to avoid being a target, or an Experian or one of these high-profile hacks, they need this also, or eventually this is going to be a problem. Security is always about the law of percentages, right? Even if the percentage is non-zero, then even though it's not high, eventually it's going to be a problem for someone, and we want to get that out of there. Why? Because our business and our jobs are dependent on this stuff being rock solid. So after we've identified this library as a risk, and we want to do some risk assessment, the risk assessment is, here's the publicly known CVE associated with this library, and here are all the applications that use this thing, and here are all the servers that this thing is currently on. So again, this isn't going to be necessarily developer purview, the server portion, but this is going to be our assessment of how pulled back the Komodo is and how uncovered we are. And so that might help to inform, here's where we need to stay late at night fixing this, or we can go ahead and schedule this thing. It's okay right now. A little bit about what we're doing in the middle. Azure is not the only tool set that we do this with, but obviously this is one of our priority, probably the priority tool set for doing this. Obviously, we're integrating into Azure boards. We're also integrating into the pipelines as well. So I've got my automated pipeline that you see ran about 15 minutes ago. That was the check-in that I did. I could integrate there, but I think a lot of our customers want to integrate on the release side. So after the build, I did a release. And it's actually now running as an app service in Azure. I'll show you that in just a moment. Looking at my time, I got a good amount of time. I'm going to click on the QA to show a task. We actually have it running as a gate as well. We consider that the old way of doing things because we don't think that a lot of people, we don't think that it got as much visibility. As a task, I think we thought that it made a lot more sense for people. So we introduced the same functionality as an agentless task. And this is essentially, let's make a go, no-go decision about whether to move our pipeline forward or halt it based on information in contrast, whether that's raw numbers of types of vulnerabilities, which we have here. These are all artificially high because I don't want all of my nightly builds to fail, so I made the numbers high. Or it could be based on statuses, so that we can start to say things like, we want to make sure that all of our vulnerabilities have been triaged before we release the software. Or we want to make sure that all of our Sev1s and Sev2s have been triaged before we release the software. If there's a SQL injection, we stop, period. And so you can make those decisions here. I happen to be using the REST API. It's not a standard part of my demo, but it is there. Larger organizations, they're standardized on maybe a custom dashboard or a third-party dashboard. They're going to want to not do business inside of Contrast, but pull that information out and do business where they're already working. So without showing you the code here, we are calling the REST API and pulling that data in as a part of the audit trail of this run. And then as we fire up the app service itself, I'm going to go over to this app service running in Azure. I'm going to go down first to the extensions section. There are multiple ways that we couldn't include our agent. The extensions are obviously an extremely scalable and seamless way to do that. So you deploy this app service, you deploy an application to it, you deploy the extension, and it's automatically to IIS itself, and it automatically starts to analyze whatever's running in IIS for vulnerabilities. That's how that works. And you're going to pass your configuration settings here, right? So we can take our marching orders from a configuration file that gives us all the authentication that we need. In headless environments like containers and app services, you're probably going to rely more on the environment, which is precisely what we're doing here. Now, I know that we've got about 15 minutes left. I want to show you one last thing. This is going to be the production side of things, an attack coming into production infrastructure, but it actually relates to the developer story in a key way. So first of all, I'm going to come back to, this is a version of the application. We saw this before, but it was running in a different browser because we'd launched it from IIS Express. This is running on Azure, and it's running in production mode. Production mode is going to be a bit more scalable, where pre-production mode, obviously the analysis is going to be a bit deeper. Because if I'm running on my desktop or if I'm running in a CI/CD build, while it still runs quickly, it doesn't need to scale globally, right? What's more important there is making sure you find all the stuff. When you're running in production, you need to scale globally, especially if it's Christmas time. coming over to the same attack that we saw before. I'm going to let the page load up here. If I simply search for all names that have the letter T in it, of course, we get that response. If I then attack the application this time, remember last time I did this? I got all the rows. In production, the application responded differently because I told it to. What went on underneath was that we detected that there was a successfully exploited vulnerability, not a potential vulnerability, which we will detect anyway, but a successfully exploited one. And we threw a type of security exception. It's literally called security exception. I caught it at the appropriate level, and I said, let me respond gracefully. And we see this on websites all the time now. Oops, something went wrong, try your request again. We obviously don't want to show a crash, but we don't want to let the attacker know that we're on to them. What just happened right now is we responded gracefully to the successful attack. And because this is a platform, we let all of the other stakeholders know that there was a problem. That's why we keep seeing these notifications from Microsoft Teams, because we're tying together all of the work of all of the different stakeholders at the power of the platform. This is going to literally allow, if we're talking about true DevSecOps, I'm going to show you in a moment how, just a little bit, how operations can respond to this, but literally at the same time, we're delivering a roll-up explanation of that vulnerability to the team server, and we're also delivering that same roll-up to the developer as soon as they click the reset button. So even while production is doing what they need to do on their side of the business to respond to the real attack, development already has a description of what happened so that they can immediately start working on a fix and sending it back down that DevSecOps pipeline. And that's what DevSecOps is. Tight iterations, high reliability, high accuracy, but still tight and fast. Now, the value that we add to development sometimes is twofold. And I've heard these two use cases from customers. One, they've got a super old application that they don't want to devote the resources to fix, the development resources to fix, but they still want some measure of security in production. So rather than buying a bunch of pre-production licenses, they'll buy some production licenses so that they know that they can not only spot these things in production, but block them. The other one is that headbutting that I spoke to everybody about 45 minutes ago. As soon as AppSec comes running, the development knows that there's a big problem and that their timelines are all shot. But if we can provide a measure of protection in production, especially a reliable one, a scalable one, that means that we don't have to run for the hills, run away from the forest fire as soon as the vulnerability is found. We can schedule it. And that protects our existing development timelines. And that's going to be of a huge value to the development community.
Yeah, definitely. You don't want to have to deal with the context switching. And I love the baby goat photo instead of the list of email addresses too.
Well, what happens is we have another demo called Pet Clinic, and we do the same thing. And of course, that one shows a cute puppy and cat. It pulls at the heartstrings. So I thought since this is called WebGoat, I would do the same thing. Yeah. So I searched on images.google.com and found something. But the idea is there happens to be this production side of the thing. I won't spend a whole lot of time here because this is really more for operations. But the idea is that all of the different stakeholders, as I've shown today, can get a little bit of what they need from the platform, and that information can be shared with everyone else, namely and most importantly, the developer. So operations over here is looking at live attacks. They're trying to figure out where that attack came from, what types of IP addresses or botnets they need to blacklist in order to stop the bleeding right now. But the idea is we don't have to wait to get context until they're finished. It tends to be a different organization politically. We can start to leverage their information in the way that we need it right away. So they're seeing this. They're seeing, how do I release a virtual patch, right? Just letting that page load real quick. A virtual patch just says, here's the signature of the web request that we no longer want to allow to service. And that can deal with a lot of things. We're seeing vulnerabilities. We're seeing this. But it's the power of the platform that allows everyone to execute at that speed with the information that they need in the way that they need it. Now, I'm going to give my diagram a rest real quick. Matt, what do you think about anything else that I should address? Any questions that came in?
No, we've been kind of grabbing them as they've come in. This has been great. You've shown us a lot, and I'm surprised you're only getting tired of talking now. That's not a criticism.
You know, the MC's here.
Yeah. Can you go back to the pipelines view just real quick? I just want to
Sure.
take another look at that.
Come back over here.
Yeah.
So we're building our release pipelines, but
Yeah.
do we want to see the actual pipeline?
No,
Okay,
yeah,
so
this is good. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a question from the audience. See, there's a community edition. What are the differences between the differences between community and paid version of
The main
Contrast
difference is that the community edition only supports Java and .NET, which are going to be those main business logic applications. Obviously, this version is going to support all the different languages. That's the main version.
Cool.
A difference, rather.
In terms of like overall just system requirements, if you can say that over a totally distributed system like we're showing, how heavy or lightweight generally would you say it is to throw contrast security into the mix? Things seem to be working pretty fast as you're going through them.
Yeah, I learned in a presentation training workshop about a year ago that I should never say that's a good question because it invalidates all the other questions, but that's a good question. So right now we're talking about a SaaS model. The server we don't have to worry about. We think of the overhead in terms of time for web requests, and this is publicly documented. So on average, in pre-production, we're looking at about 0.5 milliseconds per web request. In human terms, I'm running my unit tests. Yeah, it looked fast because we don't notice that. In production, it's 0.05 seconds per web request. So the analysis isn't as deep, but we're going to be able to scale even to global levels. In terms of overhead, when we start talking about servers, well, if someone wants to go that deep, then they tend not to care about how much horsepower we need.
Yeah. Cool. This is great. I mean, I think you've covered everything that we talked about before. I don't know any more questions to ask. I think one thing I want to call out to the audience, if you look down below on the Mixer channel, we've got a link to our Cloud Skills Challenge for DevOps. If you felt like this was a little advanced for you in terms of the DevOps process that we're talking through, because we're showing a pretty mature process here, that Cloud Skills Challenge is pretty cool. You can take yourself through a learning path on Microsoft Learn, guided training from Microsoft to get up to speed on things like Azure Pipelines and Azure Boards. And I think we might even touch on some GitHub Actions in there. I can't remember for sure, but you should check it out. There are prizes for that. So I did want to be sure we called out the Cloud Skills Challenge for DevOps.
And I fully encourage, don't allow if it feels like it's a daunting task to get up to speed on cloud, don't allow that to stop you. We all had to learn at some point, and cloud is not only the future anymore, it's the present and a little bit of the past. So there's a lot of good stuff to learn. The right tutorial will bring you up to speed really quickly, and it's going to help you to get informed and solve a lot of problems.
Cool. Any last words? Anything to bring us home with, or?
Like I said, there are a number of big differences. There's always a question of why us, why now?
Yeah.
IaaS is solving problems that are there. In some cases, we've forgotten about it because we've gotten used to those problems existing. We've got a lot of false negatives. Maybe we have a team that works really hard to tune those out. We've false positives. We have a lot of false negatives, but we don't know what we can't see, and so we're not afraid of it. They're there. And they're real. I was in a POC about this is the week before the shutdown happened, and unfortunately, I went in to find vulnerabilities in a code base that had already been scanned by a static analysis vendor. Definitely not a position I like to be in as a sales engineer. And I found a number of SQL injections because they exist.
Yeah.
They were not found, and they were not worried about it because they didn't know what they were missing. Now, your mileage may vary, but this is a real problem and definite value that we're bringing to the table over and beyond what you may already have in-house.
Yeah, no, no, I mean, I got to admit, I love you got pretty passionate during your demo, especially when we're talking about finding the legacy stuff from OSS, and it is real.
Yeah.
You do not want I call it resume generating incident um,
Mm-hmm.
to happen just because there was something there that you were blind to.
I've been in development my whole various
Yeah,
stages of development. I moved from development into static analysis, but I've also seen how static analysis has progressed over the past 13 years. And so, yeah, as a sales engineer, you want to get involved with something that you know provides value and you understand the value of it. And there's a reason I got back into this game, as I like to tell people. There was more value to sell, and it's needed by people. Yeah.
yeah, cool. No, thank you. Any plans to expand the suggestion for a fix into an actual pull request with the fix? Step up from suggestions. There's a question that just came in from the chat. Sorry if you didn't know what I was talking about there, MC.
I want to go over that one more time. So we're talking about pull requests and expanding what so that we service the pull requests.
So the tool shows you suggestions for a fix,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe the developer would have to go and find them or
Mm-hmm.
fit it into the workflow. So
Mm-hmm.
is it? I guess this would be possible feature request maybe for you guys,
Uh,
a pull request instead of just the suggestion, so it shows
yeah.
up in your GitHub flow.
The reality is, and yeah, that's something that's technically possible. It's also very hard to do with the level of accuracy that we already promise for the vulnerabilities themselves over and beyond existing security tools. And this is such a tight and new market that is relatively unknown. We want to make sure that we stick the landing that we're trying to do now. So what is it, Melissa, what you're suggesting? Absolutely 100%. But we're still dealing with the low-hanging fruit. The low-hanging fruit are making sure that we continue to provide the accuracy that the other tool solutions can't, and that we continue to broaden or to meet the technical challenges. So, for example, we're coming out with Go support in a little while. There are other languages out there that are popular that we need to make sure that we support. There are other paradigms like serverless, whatever AWS has, Azure Functions, and those are the things that our customers are asking us about the most. I would love to see an automated tool, but you think about being able to say with a high degree of accuracy that you can look at human written code and say change it in a pull request. That's actually very hard to do. It's easy to say, it's hard to do.
Yeah.
Well, it's true. It's true.
Yeah,
we want to make
totally.
sure the human mind is much better at that, frankly. So right now we're staying where we are. I'd like to see us get there, but there's some other things that are going to help provide customers more value sooner. That's all.
Cool. We are pretty much at time. Really appreciate you walking us through this. Appreciate your time today, and I especially appreciate that you were willing to be a guinea pig with our first experiment on Mixer. And thank you to the audience for sitting through, my own production skills pushed to the utmost. I hope it was a good experience for everyone. Feel free to send us mail, msusdev@microsoft.com, if there's other things you'd like to see us do. And I'll go ahead and sign off now. So again, thanks a ton, MC, and see everyone else
I'd be
later.
remiss, for me, stay safe, everyone, especially during this time. Stay safe.
Yeah, thank you. Everyone, please stay healthy. Take care.
Mm-hmm.